The full moon hung ominously in the sky, casting eerie shadows across the village of Dhavani. The once quiet night was shattered by the anguished cries of the villagers as darkness descended upon them, swallowing everything in its path. In the center of the chaos, Kavita stood trembling, her heart torn between love and terror. Beside her, Akash, his eyes filled with sorrow, whispered, "It's too late, Kavita. The curse, it's been unleashed." As the ground beneath them trembled and the air grew thick with dread, Kavita knew there was no turning back. Their love, once a beacon of hope, had awakened a darkness so ancient and powerful that it threatened to consume them all. But what happened next would leave the village haunted for generations, a chilling reminder of the price of forbidden love. In the farthest reaches of rural India, hidden away from the modern world, lay a village named Dhavani. This place was so remote that it seemed as if time itself had passed it by. The villagers clung to ancient traditions, their lives governed by rituals and superstitions passed down through generations. Surrounded by dense forests that isolated it from the outside world, Dhavani was a place where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural often blurred. Kavita, a young woman of striking beauty, lived on the outskirts of Dhavani. Unlike the other villagers, Kavita found solace in the forest, where she spent most of her time. She would wander for hours, listening to the sounds of nature, feeling the earth beneath her feet, and breathing in the scent of the trees. The forest was her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the whispers and sideways glances of the villagers. Kavita had always been different. She was quiet and introspective, preferring the company of birds and trees to that of people. The villagers thought her odd and kept their distance, but Kavita didn't mind. She had learned to embrace her solitude, finding comfort in the stillness of the forest. Dhavani was a place steeped in superstition. The villagers believed in spirits, curses, and dark forces that lurked in the shadows. They were deeply religious, and their lives revolved around rituals to appease the gods and ward off evil. The village elders, who held great power, enforced these traditions with strict discipline, ensuring that everyone adhered to the old ways. The villagers lived simple lives, tending to their crops and animals, but there was always an undercurrent of fear. They believed that the forest surrounding Dhavani was inhabited by spirits, and they rarely ventured into its depths. To them, the forest was a place of danger, filled with unseen forces that could bring misfortune or death. Kavita's parents had died when she was very young, leaving her to be raised by her grandmother, a woman who was both wise and kind. Her grandmother had taught her about the ways of the village, but she had also encouraged Kavita to be independent, to think for herself, and to find her own path in life. Kavita's grandmother had passed away a few years ago, leaving her alone in the small cottage they had shared. Since then, Kavita had withdrawn even more from the village, finding comfort in the memories of her grandmother and the peace of the forest. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the full moon began to rise, Kavita went for her usual walk in the forest. The air was cool, and the trees cast long shadows across the path. As she walked deeper into the woods, she suddenly felt as if she was being watched. She turned around and saw a figure standing among the trees. The man was tall, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold a deep sadness. He introduced himself as Akash and explained that he had recently arrived in Dhavani. Kavita felt an immediate connection with him, something she couldn't explain. There was a mystery about Akash, an air of melancholy that drew her in. Over the following weeks, Kavita and Akash began to spend more and more time together. They would meet in the forest every evening, walking and talking as the moonlight filtered through the trees. Kavita found herself opening up to Akash in a way she never had with anyone else. She shared her thoughts, her dreams, and her fears, and Akash listened with a quiet understanding. Akash, too, seemed to find comfort in Kavita's presence. He spoke of his travels, of the places he had seen, and the people he had met. But there was always a sense of sadness in his words, as if he was carrying a heavy burden. Despite this, Kavita felt a growing affection for him, and she knew that she was falling in love. As Kavita and Akash grew closer, the villagers began to take notice. They had always been suspicious of Kavita, but now their attention turned to Akash as well. Rumors began to spread about the stranger who had come to their village. Some said he was a wanderer with no home, while others whispered that he was hiding from something or someone. The village elders, who were the keepers of Dhavani's traditions, were particularly concerned. They believed that Akash's arrival was a bad omen, a sign that something dark was on the horizon. They began to warn the villagers to stay away from him, to avoid anything that might bring misfortune upon the village. One night, under the light of the full moon, Akash finally revealed his secret to Kavita. He told her that he was cursed, condemned to wander the earth for eternity as punishment for a terrible crime he had committed in a past life. He didn't know the details of the crime, only that it had been something unforgivable, something that had brought great suffering. Akash explained that he had been searching for redemption for many years, but had found none. He had come to Dhavani hoping to find peace, but now he feared that his presence was only bringing more trouble to the village. Kavita was shocked by this revelation, but she didn't turn away from Akash. Instead, she vowed to help him break the curse, no matter what it took. She believed that their love was strong enough to overcome the darkness that haunted him, and together they began to search for a way to lift the curse. Kavita and Akash's search for a way to break the curse took them on a journey through the ancient traditions and beliefs of Dhavani. They visited old temples and spoke to the village's holy men, seeking advice and guidance. They read ancient texts, searching for clues about the nature of the curse and how it might be lifted. As they delved deeper into the village's history, they began to uncover dark secrets. They learned that Dhavani had a long history of curses and dark magic, and that the village had been the site of many tragedies over the centuries. They discovered that the forest surrounding the village was believed to be haunted by the spirits of those who had died in terrible ways, and that the villagers' fear of the forest was not unfounded. As they continued their search, Kavita and Akash began to piece together the truth about the curse. They learned that it was not just a punishment for Akash's past life, but also a manifestation of the village's own darkness. The curse was tied to the land itself, and it had been passed down through generations, affecting those who were most vulnerable to its power. Kavita realized that the only way to break the curse was to confront the darkness head-on, to face the spirits that haunted the forest and the village. She and Akash began to prepare for this final confrontation, knowing that it would be dangerous and that they might not survive. Meanwhile, the villagers' unease had turned to fear and anger. They believed that Kavita and Akash were the cause of the troubles that had begun to plague the village. Crops were failing, animals were getting sick, and strange noises were heard at night. The villagers were convinced that Akash was bringing a curse upon them, and they decided to take matters into their own hands. One night, under the light of the full moon, the villagers gathered outside Kavita's house. They were armed with torches and weapons, their faces twisted with rage and fear. They demanded that Kavita and Akash leave the village immediately, or they would be forced to leave. Kavita and Akash knew that they had no choice but to face the villagers. They stepped outside, standing together against the angry mob. As the villagers shouted and threatened, something began to change in the air. The sky darkened, the wind picked up, and a sense of dread filled the night. Suddenly, the curse that had been haunting Akash for so long was unleashed. A dark shadow spread across the village, and the ground began to tremble. The villagers screamed in terror as the darkness enveloped them, dragging them into a nightmare from which there was no escape. In the midst of the chaos, Kavita realized what needed to be done. She knew that the only way to save Akash and the village was to embrace the darkness herself. She stepped forward, allowing the shadow to take her, merging her soul with the curse. As Kavita did this, the darkness began to recede. The sky cleared, the wind died down, and the ground stopped trembling. The villagers, who had been on the brink of being consumed by the curse, were saved. But Kavita had paid the ultimate price. She fell to the ground, her body lifeless, her spirit now part of the very curse she had sought to break. Akash, now free from the curse, was devastated by Kavita's sacrifice. He held her body in his arms, tears streaming down his face. He knew that Kavita had given up everything for him, and he vowed to honor her memory by living a life worthy of her love. Akash stayed in Dhavani for a few more days, helping the villagers rebuild their lives. But the memory of Kavita haunted him, and he knew that he could not stay in the village that had taken so much from him. He left Dhavani, but the love he had shared with Kavita stayed with him, guiding him as he continued his journey through life. The village of Dhavani was forever changed by the events of that night. The villagers, realizing too late the horror they had unleashed, were left to rebuild their lives. But the memory of Kavita and Akash haunted them. They had seen the power of love and sacrifice, and they knew that the darkness that had once plagued their village had not been fully vanquished. Some villagers believed that Kavita and Akash's spirits still roamed the forest, protecting the village from harm. Others thought that they had found peace in the afterlife, their love shining like a beacon in the darkness. But one thing was certain, the story of Kavita and Akash became a legend in Dhavani, a tale of love and sacrifice that would be told for generations. In the years that followed, the villagers did their best to forget the past and move on with their lives. But the memory of Kavita and Akash lingered, a reminder of the darkness that had once threatened to consume them all. The villagers continued to live in fear of the forest, believing that it was still haunted by the spirits of those who had died there. And so, the curse that had plagued Akash was never truly broken. It remained a part of Dhavani, passed down through generations, waiting for the next soul who would dare to challenge it. The villagers knew that one day, someone else would come to the village, drawn by the same mysterious force that had brought Akash there. And when that day came, the cycle would begin again. The story of Kavita and Akash is a testament to the power of love and sacrifice. They faced the darkness together, and though their fate remains a mystery, their love continues to inspire those who hear their story. But in the village of Dhavani, love and horror are forever intertwined, and those who venture too close to the darkness may never escape.